let's talk about cryptids. Welcome to Weary Lore and welcome to my Cryptids of America series. In this series, I will be introducing you to one cryptid from each state in America, giving you a short explanation of their history and story, and then giving my own opinion on the cryptid, where I think it came from, and what I think it could be. Now, I am aiming to not do well-known cryptids. I want to learn about new cryptids and pass that knowledge on to you. I won't be talking about Sasquatch or the abominable snowman or how I think they're the same thing. I won't be talking about El Chupacabra or the Wendigo. We all know about those cryptids. Let's learn about some new ones. In this series, I will be doing 5 states in each episode, with a total of 10 episodes. Let's get into it. Welcome to episode 9 of Cryptids of America. Today, we will be exploring cryptids from South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Vermont. South Dakota is home to one of America's most iconic and important landmarks. Mount Rushmore is a legend unto itself and has been an inspiration for many a creepy story, and even one very intriguing analog horror series. I got a taste of researching South Dakota cryptids when working on North Dakota, but I just barely got to dip my toe in. Like with Kansas, there are an impressive amount of hauntings in South Dakota. Their cryptid population, however, is also impressive. Unsurprising to anyone who has watched this series, South Dakota's most popular cryptid seems to be their version of Bigfoot, Takuhi, or their very own lake monster that inhabits Lake Kempeska. The Thunder Horse makes another appearance in South Dakota, but so does the Thunderbirds. And it makes me wonder, just how would those two cryptids interact? The first time that I was ever introduced to a banshee was through the X-Men. That banshee and the one I'm about to talk about have absolutely nothing in common. The cryptid that I chose for South Dakota is the Banshee of the Badlands. The Banshee of the Badlands can appear in more than one form. Some see her as a pale and weathered-looking woman, gesturing as if wanting to speak to you, but disappearing with a loud shriek before she can. She is also described as having long, unkempt hair and wearing a flowing white dress. She materializes in the Badlands, near Watchdog Butte, terrifying visitors there with her mournful screeches. In some versions of her stories, she is accompanied by a skeleton with a violin, the music mysteriously following her sighting. Following this music is unwise, however, as it is bound to lead to rocky pitfalls and the loss of one's soul. The most famous sighting of the Banshee of the Badlands happened in an unknown year to a group of cowboys. This group of cowboys bravely visited the Badlands and set up camp there, telling stories and enjoying themselves. That was until they sighted a translucent woman at the foot of a nearby hill. Gazing upon her, her visage changed into a terrifying monster before music began, a fiddle playing, and she disappeared. The music haunted them through the night, and when they awoke, only 2 of the 3 cowboys remained. Modern sightings are more vague, just stories of hearing the banshee shriek and unsuspecting victims disappearing in the Badlands, never to be seen again. Those who encounter the banshee are unnaturally drawn to her before being terrified when she vanishes with an unearthly sound. What are my thoughts? The legend of the banshee is very old. It is believed that the first appearance of the banshee was in Irish folklore in the 8th century. A story this old has to have some sort of truth behind it. Banshee may have been based on keeners. These were women known to sing sorrowful songs to lament someone's death. It could have easily been a story that was, once again, embellished. But in places like the Badlands, there could be more natural explanations. Have you ever been somewhere with really high winds making their way through small spaces? The sound that makes, it's haunting. The Badlands are made from rock formations that the wind would have to wind through and over, making a myriad of sounds as it did. Does this explain everything? No. A translucent woman and a fiddle-playing skeleton? Those are things I can't explain. The Banshee of the Badlands is an interesting story that could be real or it could just be caused by a natural phenomenon. Are you from South Dakota? Have you ever had an encounter with the banshee of the Badlands? Let me know. There is one place that I've wanted to go in Tennessee for a long time. Dollywood. You might think that Dollywood is a bit cringy, but Dolly Parton herself is a national treasure, and I'm willing to fight people on this. But for those who are more spooky inclined, Tennessee also holds a swath of the Appalachian Mountains, an area with an amazing amount of mysterious creatures. Researching the myriad of cryptids that inhabit Tennessee, I ran into something very rare. I couldn't determine what the most popular cryptid is. Every list I found, every discussion board I looked through, they all talked about different cryptids. There were a couple that came up the most often. The Bell Witch, which I have encountered in movies, and the Beast of Sugar Flats Road, which is mildly disturbing to look at. I tried to find a different picture, but even artistic renderings look the same. The cryptid that I chose for Tennessee is a bit more popular than I would normally do. I usually look for something I have never heard of, but I have heard of this one. However, I wanted to talk about a creature from the Appalachian Mountains. The knot deer is described as looking like a run-of-the-mill regular deer from a distance. When viewed up close, the knot deer shows that it truly is not a deer. It moves in a disjointed way, as if its legs are able to bend the wrong way. This creature's proportions are wrong, with their legs being too long and their chest being barrel-like. The most noticeable and perhaps off-putting difference between the knot deer and the deer is the placement of its eyes. The knot deer has forward-facing eyes, like a predator. Beyond this, there are some descriptions that state that the knot deer has multiple eyes, or even a bovine-shaped head. This cryptid is not normally violent. It's actually more curious towards humans. It does not have the normal innate fear that a deer has. It will approach a human. But there have been reports of being chased after provoking the knot deer. This has led to people being stranded up trees and the knot deer even standing on its hind legs trying to get to them. Sightings of the knot deer are said to have started centuries ago, and they are seen all across the world. However, their sightings are centralized in the Appalachian Mountains. The sightings are vague, like a lot of cryptids, with people saying they saw a deer that just looked wrong. A deer that seemed to have uncanny intelligence behind their eyes. I did find a very interesting personal account of a knot deer sighting. Like a lot of the sightings I report, this was found on Reddit, so its authenticity is shaky. But that was everything to do with cryptids. The Reddit user described being alone in the dark, but feeling very anxious and on edge. Something that didn't normally happen to them. They enjoyed being alone in the dark in the woods, but not that night. When they gave up and decided to leave, they saw the knot deer on the side of the road. A huge, almost deer that watched them in a very uncomfortable way. They did everything they could to make the deer move, revving their motorcycle engine, flashing their lights, yelling at it, but the creature wouldn't budge. Until it did. It walked forward on 2 legs, only 2 steps, but it had moved and not away from them. Then, all of a sudden, it shook its head madly and hopped away into the darkness. That's quite the visual. What are my thoughts? I have 2 trains of thought here. The first, this sounds very much like another cryptid, the skinwalker. I know, I said it. It's my hide on the line if the legends are true. It's very well known that a skinwalker can change its form, but it's not perfect. With both of them being in the Appalachian Mountains, I have to wonder if they are one and the same. From a more scientific and perhaps disturbing side, well, this could just be a deer. The first explanation could be birth defects. This could shift the eyes into an unnatural position and cause walking issues, even something called being double jointed. It would just make their legs look wrong. Then there's something called CWD, chronic wasting disease, or zombie deer syndrome. I'm going to show you just one image of a deer believed to have CWD. I advise you not to look it up. I regret my decisions. This disease can cause a myriad of symptoms. One of the first is trouble with movement. Then there's changes in behavior. Some of these being listlessness, tremors, and nervousness. As it continues, the deer will lose its fear of humans and just become utterly confused. As the disease progresses, the deer wastes away while still alive. It loses its body fat and its muscle mass, making it look much different. It makes it look like it's not a real deer anymore. Are you from Tennessee? Have you ever had an encounter with a not deer? Let me know. Texas, known for cowboys, the Alamo, and being the largest state in the United States, even though it's not. I don't know why, but I just never considered cryptids to have lived in Texas. With how trigger-happy people in other states have been, I would have thought the Texans would have taken them all out by now. But they haven't. Unsurprisingly, Bigfoot has made a big impression in Texas. There's more than one Bigfoot-type creature, and Texas actually has their own North American Wood Ape Conservancy, previously called the Texas Bigfoot Research Conservancy. The chupacabra is also popular in Texas, which really doesn't surprise me. I was interested in lechuza, but having just done the deer woman last episode, I felt they were a little too closely related. Not actually related, but the same subset of cryptid. I will admit, I searched for a long time for a cryptid to report on in Texas. For some reason, cryptids in Texas seem to turn out to be real creatures that are dispatched, like I assumed before. Once there's a picture and physical evidence proof, I don't see those as cryptids anymore. It was only when I turned back to the book that I found one that was interesting, to say the least. Big Bird, no, not that one, though we can talk about how creepy he is later, is an unknown, mysterious animal that flew over the Rio Grande Valley area of South Texas in 1976. Big Bird is described as being around 5 feet tall, with a long beak and bat-like wings. This cryptid is featherless and, most strangely, has a monkey-like face. In most of the encounters, the creature was not violent in any way. It minded its own business. It was only the final sighting where the cryptid attacked, grabbing a man with its talons and ripping his shirt as it attempted to lift him into the air. The first reports of the creature were from policemen in Harlingen who claimed to see a bird flying over the road with a wingspan wider than their patrol car. The first dated sighting was on January 1st, 1976. Big Bird was sighted by a couple teenagers who were playing outside when they noticed the creature watching them from a nearby irrigation canal. At some point, the bird screeched at them and disappeared, leaving nothing but 3-toed tracks pressed nearly an inch into the ground. On January 7th, a man by the name of Alvarico Guajardo was shocked when something slammed into the side of his trailer. When he went outside to investigate, he found himself face to face with a man-sized bird. The most harrowing sighting happened on January 14th when Armando Grimaldo went outside to investigate what sounded like a bat flying around, only to be descended upon by Big Bird and lifted partially into the air before escaping. Sightings did stop after this. However, several school teachers did claim to see a strange bird around the same time that had a wingspan of at least 12 feet. What are my thoughts? Well, I guess dinosaurs are real? Okay, that came out wrong. Dinosaurs have always been real. Let's try this again. Dinosaurs still live amongst us. Too dramatic? Okay. One of the accepted explanations is that this creature could have been a pterosaur, which is technically not a dinosaur, so ignore everything I said before. They're also massively extinct. Now, you do know that I don't believe that extinct means extinct, so I had to put that out there as a possibility. But a more likely possibility is an escaped exotic bird. The snowy albatross, a bird that I've never heard of, has the longest wingspan of any living bird. It reaches upwards of 11 feet. Its body height can be up to 4.5 feet. That's rather human-sized and terrifyingly large for a bird. Now, it doesn't have a primate's face. It's actually quite cute for a bird. But this is where the embellishment comes in. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only bird that it could be. There are other birds out there that look downright frightening and are also huge. Yes, I'm looking at you, shoebill stork. Any bird can lose its feathers from stress, and that would make it look even more unearthly. My personal opinion, this is a misidentification with a heavy dose of embellishment. Are you from Texas? Have you ever had an encounter with Big Bird? Let me know. In researching Utah, I learned that it's called the Beehive State, which was very curious. I had to figure out why. To be honest, I didn't expect the answer. Apparently, it's called the Beehive State because the beehive symbolizes the value of the state's pioneer settlers, such as hard work, industry, thrift, and perseverance. If you live in Utah, did you know this? In researching Utah's cryptids, there was one that stood out well above and beyond the others. That is Utah's aquatic enigma, the Bear Lake Monster. But Utah does have other regulars, such as Bigfoot, skinwalkers, and UFOs. Yeah, I don't talk a lot about UFOs, but they're all over the place. The water babies also make another appearance here. It seems like not a single cryptid is respecting state borders anymore. Utah's most popular cryptid is the Bear Lake Monster, but it's far from the only lake monster in the state. There's the Great Salt Lake whales, giant brine shrimp, and maybe a dragon? But the one I want to talk to you about today is the Utah Lake Monster. I almost completely wrote off this cryptid as a Loch Ness Monster type cryptid, but it's really not. The Utah Lake Monster is described as having the head of a dog with wicked black eyes. It has the body of a serpent, which is able to swim through the water effortlessly. It's said that the creature is able to lift its head several feet out of the water like it's a section of a large stovepipe. The Utah Lake Monster can not only make sound, but roar loudly enough to terrify passerbys. In one description, it was said that the cryptid's head was 2 to 3 feet long, and it had a snout like an alligator's that looked to be 18 inches wide. In this description, it was also said that the monster had 4 legs, as long as a man's arm, that it would lift out of the water as it swam. It also didn't seem like the Utah Lake Monster was particularly friendly. It scared most who saw it and even chased 2 boys to shore with nefarious intentions. The first sighting of the Utah Lake Monster is believed to have happened in August of 1868. A local resident reported to the Deseret News that he had seen a large snake with the head of a greyhound gliding in the waters of Utah Lake. And aside, I'm going to reference Deseret News multiple times in these sightings, but I, unfortunately, couldn't find the actual news articles. This is because Google thinks it knows what I want better than I do, and would only show me news articles on the Bear Lake Monster, no matter how I search. Back to the sightings. In 1871, 2 men reported seeing a creature a mile from the shore that they estimated to be around 60 feet long. This was also where the stovepipe analogy came from. This was also reported to the Deseret News. It was in June of 1880 that 2 boys, Willie Roberts and George Scott, were swimming in Utah Lake when they saw what they thought to be a dog or beaver heading towards them in the water. It soon became apparent that this was not a dog or a beaver, but a monster. They are the two who were chased out of the lake by the cryptid. Sightings mostly went quiet after that, until recently. In 2016, a local news station addressed the monster of Utah Lake. In this article, people were warned that if they go into Utah Lake, they may bump into an unwelcome guest. What are my thoughts? I have to admit that I was drawn to this one because of the image of a good boy doggy swimming towards you in a lake, then slowly morphing into this monster. It was very creepy in my head. Now, there are a lot of different fish species in Utah Lake. While researching my monster catfish short, I found that they could get very large, though they wouldn't look anything like the Utah Lake monster. They would, however, look like a big monster under the water and would definitely be a fish that you could bump into. Now, I'm really reaching here, but there is a water snake called Cerberus rynchops. It's also known as the dog-faced water snake. It's native to the coastal water of South and Southeast Asia. It's called the dog-faced water snake because the way its upper jaw is formed gives it a dog-like appearance. Now, they aren't large enough to be the Utah Lake monster. Nothing I can give you really would be. Their average length is around 22 inches. Utah Lake has invasive species. That's all I think this could be. An invasive, non-native something. Or it's just a Utah Lake monster. A made-up story, a legend, or even a real cryptid. I have no idea. And not knowing is okay. Are you from Utah? Have you ever had an encounter with the Utah Lake monster? Let me know. Maple syrup. That's it. That's all I know about Vermont. And I don't even know if that's a real thing or a stereotype. While researching cryptids in Vermont, I found that there's a mountain called Mount Mansfield. This probably wouldn't mean anything to anyone else, but I grew up in a small town named Mansfield, so it just endeared me to Vermont a little more, if you can be endeared to a state. Most popular cryptids? Well, that's probably Bigfoot or Champ, who should be a familiar face because of one of my previous videos. However, the Northfield pigman came up quite often as well. I did look into it because I didn't know about it, and it's an interesting story, but it seems to be closer to an urban legend than a cryptid. I chose the cryptid that I chose for Vermont because of its name. The Awful is described as a creature similar in appearance to a griffin. This would mean that the Awful has the head and wings of an eagle, but the body, tail, and hind legs of a lion. Except it doesn't. The description for the Awful has been cobbled together from multiple sightings. Start with the base of a griffin and give it gray skin. Then remove the lion's tail and give it a long serpent-like tail instead. The wingspan is also going to be enlarged, up to 20 feet wide, and it is said that the Awful has huge claws that could easily wrap around a 1920s era milk can. Lastly, there were reports that the creature had a pointed beak, something that reminded the witness of a pterosaur. Talk about a chimera of a creature. But even with the name and the terrifying description, the Awful seemed to be rather chill. It just stared and watched. It didn't attack. There was one sighting that said they saw the Awful flying away holding something in its talons that was crying, but if it was a baby or an animal was unknown. Sightings of the Awful began in 1925. The first sighting purportedly happened to two sawmill workers from Richford. They were on their way to work when they saw the Awful sitting on the rooftop of a building, just watching them. It scared one of the men so badly that he had a heart attack right then and there. He thankfully survived, but was scarred for the rest of his life. As the months went by, farmers continually reported sightings of the cryptid flying over their fields. The townspeople also reported the creature landing on their rooftops and scaring them back inside their homes. There are rumors that H.P. Lovecraft himself took a secret trip to Vermont and sighted the awful while he was there. This made the creature become a major inspiration for some of his own creations. But this is completely unsubstantiated. Still, it's an interesting tie-in. It was thought that the sightings, many of which I didn't tell you about, stopped in 1928. But an article from the Innisburg Falls County Courier in 2006 reported that an enormous winged creature had been sighted. Unfortunately, the Innisburg Falls County Courier is no longer in publication, and I was unable to find the article online. According to the source I read this from, that was as much of a description as was given. Could this have been the awful all these years later, or was it another creature entirely? What are my thoughts? The awful is an amazing name for a cryptid, but I feel like it was a little underutilized here. I almost feel like the story wasn't embellished enough. It wasn't epic enough to match the name. But does that make it more believable? I wanted to look at this from a different viewpoint than I did Big Bird. The viewpoint is storytelling, my experience as a writer. The mere fact that H.P. Lovecraft became part of this story made it seem even more like a story. It was very well crafted, the descriptions were imaginative, and it was just realistic enough to be believable. But it just hits me as a hoax. I did look into flying animals with tails. They do exist, but they don't look like serpentine tails. This is the long-tailed widow bird. It definitely has a tail, but it's clearly feathers, with the similarity to the griffin and the tie-in of a famous creature creator. This cryptid seems more like the brainchild of an imaginative author than an actual creature that was sighted. But that's just my personal opinion. No matter what, the awful will be remembered as a cryptid that caused terror in every person who had the misfortune of seeing it. Are you from Vermont? Have you ever had an encounter with the awful? Let me know. Episode 9. Almost done. It's amazing to me how far we've all come and how much we've learned. It amazes me how much I wish I hadn't learned. Researching this many different cryptids makes me all the more a believer that something more is out there. Something mysterious and undiscovered. Sure, some cryptids may be cases of misidentification, and some may be outright hoaxes, but not everyone has enough imagination to create things like this. Something, somewhere, had to have actually been seen. I just can't wait to see what we discover next. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.